growing up as a fatherless child had a major impact on my life. And I knew who my father was, and I had a very limited relationship with him, but it led me down a very dark path.
Greetings, and welcome to the Redefining Grief podcast with yours truly, Herdyne Mercier. I am super stoked and excited to bring no other than Jay Cameron to the podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you, and so glad to be here, and looking forward to sharing with everyone today.
I know. You know why I wanted you on? Because I know you're going to keep it 100.
That's the only way I know how to do it. So
I know, and it's truly the only way to live, but people have a hard time with that because I think people are still in that mindset of wanting to be accepted by all. I have come to a place in my life where I figured if you don't like me in my truth, you might as well not like me.
Exactly. And I say the same thing. As I was telling someone recently, I said, I'm at an age now where I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm not trying to, you get to a point where it's draining.
Yes.
and you find yourself losing yourself trying to become something to appease what someone else wants. And if you do that too many times, you find yourself, you can really become unhappy like that. So yeah, I get it.
And so since I only got this one life and I'm dedicated to living it fully, I am nothing. And I honor the truth in what it means. And
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Cameron, what is your truth?
Well, there are many layers to that, but since we're talking about the topic of fatherlessness and not having a father, I wanted to make sure that this topic was not glossed over, because even today I'm hearing where some are trying to call it a myth. They're trying to dismiss it as not being as serious as it really is. But it's a very major topic. And for many people, they don't talk about it or they don't know how to process it. They don't know the effects of it. So they're just kind of living life in this space. But growing up as a fatherless child had a major impact on my life. And I knew who my father was, and I had a very limited relationship with him, but it led me down a very dark path because my identity was tied to who my father was, or the lack of his presence. And so because he was absent, it led to a lot of issues with insecurity, a lot of issues with rejection, a lot of issues with a lack of assertiveness, issues with, again, as I stated before, identity. So there were, like I said, many layers to this. And it caused my relationships, well, even before relationships, it caused me to have a distorted worldview. So I oftentimes saw myself from a victim's standpoint. And so somehow I was a victim because my father wasn't there, or I never heard my father say, "I love you." And his actions indicated to me that he didn't. So you're dealing with the effects of the rejection, but then you're processing it as a child. So you're not processing it as an adult who can now rationalize it and say, okay, maybe he had some issues that he didn't address. Maybe he was abused. Maybe he went through some rejection issues of his own. A child doesn't think like that. A child just thinks, my father's not here. What did I do? There's somehow I'm flawed because of this, and I'm the reason why he's absent. And so you take a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and I'm going back through the years when I really became aware that he was absent was probably right around 7 or 8. And then the promises that he would make, because he knew that how he was carrying the relationship was wrong. He told me, he said, I'm going to do better. I'm wrong for this. But then he would turn around and do the same behavior. So he would make promises. He wouldn't show up. I could only meet him at his office or some sort of public place. I was never welcomed in his home until I pretty much forced myself. But that was, even after that, I wasn't welcome there. It was kind of like, okay, I have to acknowledge him as being my son, and I have to welcome him because he's pressing it. But going through all of that caused me to be a very insecure young man, and then a very insecure man, and it destroyed all of my relationships before I got married. It nearly destroyed my marriage. And that's what I talk about, how these issues and not really addressing these issues led to so much destruction in my life.
This is so good. Like, not that you went through the experience, but that you decided to sit in the mess to get the glory out of it.
Yes.
And when I go back and I think about your story and I think about the interviews you've done on Malik's podcast, the Whole Brother podcast, I'm going back and I'm gathering, here you are, a young boy who recognized that his father is present, but so absent. You understand? And
Yes.
I can identify that with that series in my life where I knew my father was alive. My parents are still married to this day, but he went back to Haiti for several years. And I felt like a fatherless daughter. And there's so many of us who have parents that they can see. They are in the house, possibly presently. They are around, but we still feel fatherless. But now, before I even say that, before my father moved to Haiti for those number of years, he was the guy that taught me how to cut grass, change the tire.
Oh, wow.
He was a cab driver, still a cab driver all his life. He taught me how to, when a job came in, to accept the jobs for him. He taught me how to ride a bike. He told me he loved me. He's the very first man who ever said, I'm sorry. Very first man to ever give me flowers. So it affected me. I don't even begin to know. It affected me deeply. That the weight of this world probably was so much for him that he went to Haiti and lived for years. He didn't come back until I was graduating from high school.
Wow.
In 2000.
Wow.
So he was gone my high school year. He was gone most of my middle school years. But I had him in those, so I knew the dad he could be.
Yes.
But in my little mind, I couldn't understand, or why did he leave? Where did he go?
Yeah.
But yet they were still married.
Oh, no, that's interesting. That's interesting.
And they're still together now. They're in Haiti right now, enjoying their lives. But I had this hard conversation with him where it hurt.
I was going to ask if you had the conversation with him,
Yeah. It hurt.
What did he say?
He said, I don't even think he knows how to describe it, but being a licensed clinical social worker and a therapist, I just think he checked out. Because when you think about his story, and this is where grace comes in for me, he was the first one to migrate by boat from his family. He's the youngest child. He came to the United States and instantly he started working and providing and doing all these things. And he lost his dad young.
Oh, wow.
So the weight of the world was probably too much. That's just just looking back, that's just the only way I can describe it. To him, if you ask him, he would say, I was being a man. I had to go take care of some things for the family. I was trying to build a business in Haiti, and I was trying to come back in Haiti and do those things. But at the end of the day, you weren't present. And I needed you. And for me, being able to have that conversation with him was very freeing. But I find myself to be fortunate because I'm allowed to have, since I was little, to have hard, honest chats with my parents when they call me out in love and I call them out in love.
That is rare, as you say, very rare, because I know so many people who do not have that option available to them, and they're kind of floating along in life. It can become very toxic, and so some people are dealing with fatherlessness or motherlessness within the household where the parent is present, or the parent may, like in your case, may disappear for a period of time, or maybe so busy working that they are absent. So there's so many layers to it. But one of the things that I had to do, because I was destroying every relationship, I was destroying my life, I
Mm-hmm.
found myself getting in trouble in ninth grade with the law in ninth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I am finding myself in this position where I have all of this potential, but I don't realize it because I don't have my father to affirm it.
Mm-hmm.
So here, sometimes there's a place for a child to have that particular parent, a mother or father, to come and affirm certain qualities about them. And so my father, because he and I, he's passed away now, but we're so very similar. There are things that he could have affirmed and built up because he understood he understood the journey. And so because I was kind of out there aimlessly wandering, there were so many mistakes that I made. But as I was making the mistakes, it was like each lesson I was learning was kind of propelling me towards where I am today, and being the father I am today, being the husband that I am today. So on many levels, he was teaching me what to do by way of what he was doing. And so, but that's kind of like the fast forward version, but there was a lot of pain. I remember being 9 years old, and I sat in the chair and I cried and asked my mother, I said, well, where's my father? Why doesn't he want me? And so she really couldn't do anything about it, because here I am 9 years old asking this question. And so even it made it awkward because my father had 11 children from 4 different women. I was the only one of his children who came solo. So I am my mother's only child. And so I have siblings in their 60s, and I have a sibling who's still in his 20s. So that's how, how his situation kind of panned out. But by going through that, and it's almost like, and then there was a level of fear because I could never confront him directly with what I was really feeling, because I was afraid if I did, then it would be like a permanent rejection. So I had to suppress a lot of emotions. And so when you suppress emotions, they either manifest internally or externally. And for me, it was probably a combination of the two, because when you're holding all of that back, then it would turn into these explosive arguments, extreme passive aggressiveness. So here I am, that's how you operate, because you're afraid to speak up. So again, it affected assertiveness, confidence, the ability to really articulate what I was feeling. And so I had to seek therapy in order to address a lot of it. And it was embarrassing, because you don't want to, everybody wants to appear as though everything is fine. Nobody wants to admit that, the fact that my father wasn't there impacted me in a negative way. Nobody who wants to admit that, especially as a teenager or somebody in their early 20s. That's when everybody was trying to, it's all right. I'm not worried about it. He's doing his thing. I'll be all right. But then once you start seeing how it affects others, and when your relationships are failing, and you're trying to blame everybody else for it, but the reality is you have to look in the mirror and acknowledge for yourself what's going on and your role in the situation. Everything failing and everybody else is wrong. I don't know. As you begin to mature, you have to start looking at it differently, or else you continue this pattern. And I wanted the pattern to end. I didn't want my children to repeat the same cycle. I didn't want them to look up and then, okay, their father is absent, but he's, you're going through all of these changes. So today, with all 4 of my children, we have, I'm very present in their lives, and probably too present, but.
I'm so happy to hear that, because I think that's what we have in common. We took what we didn't like about our childhood, and for me, I prayed for something different, and that's how I got my husband. I literally prayed for someone who had the qualities that I loved about my dad, but had everything else he wasn't.
Got it.
Where he doesn't play about his kids. Like, if this relationship went south, I know Dr. J is taking me to court. I know he's fighting for his kids, and rightfully so.
He's serious about that.
Oh, yeah, he's not playing, right?
That's right.
And he's not playing. They're his, right?
Yes.
And rightfully so. And we tease each other all the time, although we know we're going to be together for a very long time. But that journey of being a father is so important to him, and me being a mother is so important to me, that to raise healthy kids, We
Yes.
always said if something goes down, we got to be there for them first.
Yes.
But once pain and sorrow comes up, that's a different story for certain individuals. And what I want to go back to is the boy in you.
Yes.
To get to the man who you are today, what did you need to heal? And what patterns did you have to break?
Oh, there were so many areas that needed to heal. I think the biggest part was the rejection, because when your father says, I promise I'm going to do better, and the boy believes the father, but then the father does not come through, you begin to lose faith in people. So you now begin to expect people to disappoint you. So I had to start healing from the expectation of disappointment, because when you get into relationships with the expectation of disappointment, you can, and I won't say this is the case with everyone, but I know for me, you can be, I wanted to be the first one to strike. I didn't want to be the one to receive the disappointment. So I would disappoint first to see how far I could push the envelope. And then from there, so I would go into relationships with dysfunction already there. So I had to heal from that. I had to begin to change my mindset and my perspective to understand that everybody was not out to hurt me. Everybody was not out to, and it led to extreme trust issues, to where it's like, I don't trust anybody. And okay, how are you going to survive if you don't trust anybody? If you're waiting for people to, again, somehow betray you or cross you. So that took years and years to really deal with, because of the simple fact that my father, through his life in my relationship with him, demonstrated where he could not be trusted. And it also communicated to me that I was not valuable. So when you're feeling that you're not valuable, when you're feeling as though you can't trust people, now you have to address that, or else it will, this is one of the reasons why I've discovered that so many people's relationships fail, because of whether it's a lack of trust, whether it's unresolved issues or hurt, that's what will contribute to it. So I had to do that. And then I had to learn how to reconcile the bitterness, because bitterness is one that the bitterness got in, and it was to the point when he passed away. The emotions that I felt sadness, not so much for the fact that he passed away. I felt sadness because I would never get the answers to my questions. And then on the flip side of it, part of me was actually rejoicing that he did pass away, because I felt as though he got what he deserved. And so I was like, oh, and that's, I talk about that also. I had some very eloquent words when I found out that he passed away. Right, exactly. Woo! But then at the same time, I was crying. I was torn. I was conflicted, because I still, no matter what, I still wanted my father. I still just wanted to hear him say, Jay, I love you. I believe in you. You're doing well. And there were times in our relationship where he did have positive words, but he never said, I love you, or I don't recall that would have stuck out to me. That would have, meant something. And so that took a lot. It caused me to not have trust in Black men in particular. So I had a very negative view of Black men, older Black men, because of what I dealt with him. So now in life, I appreciate the value that many older Black men bring. I recognize the challenge of his generation, but at the same time, I now appreciate that. But the boy took years to deal. And I have to be honest, there are times that if I'm not careful, the little boy will still try to come up and say, hey, I'm still here now. I didn't go. Oh, you forgot about that, did you? Like, oh, wow, where did you come from? But now I embrace him, because that little boy is still a part of who I am. Yeah. And I have to recognize that, you're still there. And now how do let's help that little boy grow up. Or sometimes it's like, all of the little boy isn't bad. Because I saw a picture. As a matter of fact, this picture, let me see if I have a picture right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it. I just happened to, this is the little boy.
Aww.
That's him. And so when I saw this picture, it's like that's the smile had an innocence to it. Now I didn't at that point, I didn't know I was a fatherless child. I didn't know it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was the little kid. I was like, hey, I'm happy. And so I look at that, and then I could see as I got older how that smile left. And there was an innocence there. And so there's nothing wrong with the little boy. And it's nothing wrong. Now I can't go around acting like the little boy, but I can appreciate those emotions that he had and how he so what I did, that little boy can still play with my sons, even though my sons are like almost grown. Well, two of them are grown. But as they're older, it's like I can still be that, I can connect to that little kid. So it took years to heal. And I guess if something new comes up, then I'll have to heal from that. But I knew I needed to reconcile what happened. And this is how I reconciled it. And it was really on a spiritual level. And for a lot of people, it kind of surprised them when I said this, but the reality is as I reflect on the journey, this is the story that God gave me. This is, and I had to look at it like this, because if I didn't, again, it could lead to the pity party, but God knew who I was going to be born to, and he knew how the journey and the story was going to play out. And he saw fit for me to be in this situation. As I look at my children today, and again, this is now years later, but as I look at my children today, would I go back and change my story so that it would be more palatable for me? I wouldn't, because that created me. My journey created who I am today to become the father who I am. Now, maybe I would have been a better father. I don't know. But I wouldn't go back and change it, because when I say that, meaning obviously the child would go back and change it, by having a healthy father and all those different things. But the reality is, and this is how I have to process it from a reality standpoint, I can't go back and change it. And as I learn more about my father, I now see where his absence was protection.
Ooh. Say that one again and break that down.
I will break it down. As I've learned more about my father and his history, his personality, his habits, his ways, I now see his absence as protection, because I see the results of those who were in his presence and who had the brunt of his discipline and whatever else came along with that. And I see the result of that. His absence, although I longed for his presence, had his presence been there, I know just from understanding his ways, that it would have been a very toxic environment for me. And because we are so similar, I'm certain I would have recreated his patterns, because it would have just been natural for me to go down that road. And so now that I'm older and I understand it, there's no way I can be bitter about it, because I see I see the results of those who were in his presence. And so what would have been different for me? What the psychological abuses, even though I dealt with some of that, I didn't deal with the direct impact of it, but some of my siblings did. So today they're over 40, and they're dealing with the challenges of that. And so they aren't even able to reconcile a lot of it, because they can't say, well, my father wasn't there and I was protected, because they weren't, so they're having to deal with it in a different way. And so now, as I'm actually walking some of my siblings through it to help them understand that there's nothing wrong with you. Our father had an issue, and because of that, we all dealt with it on a different level. But again, this is why this is what the man had to process. The 9-year-old boy couldn't process the fact that my father, I'm being protected from a very negative influence. That 9-year-old boy did not get it. He was thinking to himself, there's something wrong with me. Where's my dad? How come he doesn't love me? But as I've gotten older, I see it. a completely different way. And that's what has enabled me to move forward without the bitterness, because again, I don't know his story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know that he would be, if he were still alive, he would be 88 this year.
Mm-hmm.
That was a different era. That was a different generation. That was a different culture. He grew up in the South. I can only imagine what it was like for a Black man in the South in the early 1900s, early to mid 1900s, because he was born in 1932,
Mm-hmm.
to grow up with many of the disadvantages that he had. And so I don't know what their survival mechanisms were. I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand it. So
Mm-hmm.
but I know how I was living um early in my life, and I understood I could have had 11 children. It could have gone that way. It could have
Mm-hmm.
been, I could have been down that road easily. And
Mm-hmm.
so by God's grace, that didn't happen. But it's one of these things where you begin to process it differently, and or from a different perspective. And when you do, it it helps you in the journey, and that's just for me. Other people who've gone through
Mm-hmm.
situations where perhaps the parent was in the home and very abusive, very toxic, they're having to look at it through a different lens. And this is why I encourage people to talk to professionals to get help to navigate this space, because
Yeah.
it hurts. This stuff hurts. It's
Yeah.
real. And it's okay to say, I hurt.
Yes. It's okay to say I hurt, but what I'm learning and just speaking to clients and speaking to people, that saying I hurt is very uncomfortable because they've never been taught to say I hurt. We are taught as children, what you crying for? You want me to give you something to cry about? So we are
Mm,
taught to mute our emotions. So for
yes.
me, growing up in a home where we can talk about emotions, that was rare. Very, very rare. And so that's why me saying that hurts me, I'm sad, it doesn't feel good, those things are not common language for my friends and my relatives.
Yes. Especially in our community. I
Yes,
mean,
especially in our community.
because,
Especially.
yeah. And one of the things I talk about in the book also, I have it's a paragraph or a section called Train to Cover Up Foolishness.
Mm,
And we have been trained on so many levels to cover up the dysfunctions and to keep quiet. And we're not supposed to have emotions. And I think it's cultural, meaning even in our families, but I think even in our culture, if we start talking about how we really feel, that people want to pounce on it. They want to, somehow shut you down. They want to silence you, and you're just supposed to keep it to yourself. And I see that so often in so many circles, that if you say what you really feel, you might as well get ready to get kicked out. You might as well get ready to be, blackballed on some level.
mm-hmm,
So imagine if you're walking around with all of this trauma, you're dealing with trauma in your family. This is how many people live. They're dealing with the trauma in their family they can't talk about. They're dealing with the trauma in their professional life they can't talk about. They're dealing with the trauma in their culture. Sometimes it may even be in their religious circles where they can't talk about what they're dealing with. And so they're just walking around like ticking time bombs, or they're holding this stuff in. And so it's eating away at them physically,
mm-hmm,
or eroding them spiritually or emotionally, to the point where the real person has been buried beneath all of this stuff that they've held in. And then they reproduce, then they have children.
mm-hmm,
And so because of that, then now the children, if they're not really aware of it and don't get the help that they need, then they pass it on to the children. And
mm-hmm,
the children are like, well, why, what did I do? And they're like, well, I was just born, what? And so by us having these types of conversations,
mm-hmm,
my hope is that it would begin to be the catalyst for families to start talking about the pain, the real pain. And sometimes it's ugly. Sometimes it's going to bring up some things that people don't want to talk about. But if
mm-hmm,
you really want to heal, if you want to, I always talk about, if you want to get to an infection, to the root of an infection, sometimes you have to peel back the scab. You have to
mm-hmm,
go down into the wound, and that's painful. And
mm-hmm.
sometimes you don't have anesthetic.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to go with no anesthetic. But when it's all said and done, you get everything out of there. Now that wound can heal. The scar might still be there, but the wound is healed, or it's healing. And that now we're moving towards health, whether it's emotional, physical, or spiritual health. We're now moving in that direction.
You know, this is so good. One of the things that I teach in my grief anchors is the very first one in healing is truth.
Mm.
Every podcast is opened up with that. What is your truth?
Wow.
It is truth, and truth represents freedom. The second thing that I teach in my grief anchors, after we talk about truth, then we go to I'm just having a blank. I can't believe it's my anchors.
No, it's fine. No, but as you talk about the truth, you know, it's so real.
Truth is so real. Truth is so freeing, right? And then you anchor down the second anchor. Now that it's coming back to me,
Right.
The second anchor is heartbreak. Examining that heartbreak. I'm talking about having a surgery on that heartbreak.
Yes.
And then finding the third anchor is that connection and represents community, because you can't heal in everyone's community.
That's right.
You have to find that community tribe to help you heal. And sometimes it looks like a therapist, and sometimes it looks like a family member, and sometimes it looks like a friend. One of my things is creating safe places so that broken hearts can be seen, heard, and validated, period. The fourth anchor is saying I'm anchoring down in faith, because it's really going to take that faith to help me process that ugliness.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then you get to a place, and the fifth anchor is restoration. And restoration is saying what you have, Jay, is that peace. Although as a boy you were hurting, and as a man, that boy grew with you. But you decided that I'm going to fight for that restoration by dealing with the ugly truth of my story. And as I turn the page, and with every page that is turned, I am going to make it better. And for me, in listening to your story, you've turned the page by working on your truth. And every time you turn the page with every child you had, you made it better.
Yes, I as you have broken that down, I've never quite thought about it like that, but you articulated it perfectly. And it's my hope is that anyone who's watching or listening, that they would understand that, because sometimes there's a lot of shame attached to our past. And that shame will cause us to become hesitant. It will cause us to become doubtful, apprehensive on so many levels. But I knew that, and it doesn't happen overnight, you know, with every layer that was being peeled back, I understood that I had a responsibility to set a different example for those who were like me, you know, because that's why I have no problem talking about the pain, talking about the real raw emotions of what happened and what I had to do in order to heal. And all of the steps that you laid out are perfect. You laid them out perfectly, because I had to go through each one of those steps in order to get to this place. And I know that there's another level to even go to, even beyond here, but I'm so thankful to be at this place, because it wasn't always like this. You know, when you feel like you're spinning out of control and you don't understand why you're doing certain things or why you're thinking or feeling a certain way, as you continue to move forward and you seek the help, then you're able to start processing it in a much better way. And so I'm thankful for that. And most appreciative for the journey and being able to encourage other people to do the same.
And you represent what anchoring in truth really represents, in the freedom that comes with it. Now, before we come to a close of the interview, one of the things that I like to do is ask my pearls of wisdom questions. And there are 3 questions. And the very first one is, in redefining the grief in your life, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned that there's nothing wrong with me. And I think that that's the part that I struggle with the most, because even growing up, because I was into some very unhealthy behaviors. And so the statements would come, what's wrong with you? There's something wrong with you. You have a problem. There's something off. And I was grieving, and I didn't know how to grieve. And so my identity is like, there's nothing wrong with me. And so I think that would have to be the answer to that question.
Good. The second thing is, we all have a day where our master would call us home. And if today was your day and you had 5 words or less to say, what would it be?
Who would I be saying it to?
You will decide.
Oh, I would decide. Oh, wow. That's pretty good. 5 words. I guess I would break
5 words or less.
5 words or less. All right. I'm going to split this. So I would say to my family, I love you. And I would say to my master, thank you.
Chills. I got chills. That's so good. And now this is the final question. During my dark times, one of the things I love to do is sing. I swear I sound like Whitney Houston in my head. I've been told, but you can't tell me otherwise. During your dark time, what songs get you through?
Oh, some Fred Hammond. Give Me a Clean Heart. That's one of my favorites. And Kirk Franklin, ironically, there were several Kirk Franklins, but the song called Conquerors. It's an old Kirk Franklin song from back off the, I think the CD was Melodies from Heaven, the CD back in 95.
Wow.
And talked about a gentleman by the name, Tamala Mann and Dalen, I think his name, Dalen Collins, I think that's it. And they were the leads on that. And the song called Conquerors, if I take it back. So it'd be those two. Clean Heart, Fred Hammond, Conquerors, Kirk Franklin.
Woo! I'm going back to listen to them all.
It's old school. Those are old school.
I know it is old school, but I used to jam to them.
Okay.
So
okay.
I know, put the cassette in the thing and press play and replay. And then when we had the CD players, I would press replay on that. And I just haven't heard it in so long that I want to go back and listen to the words now. Not the child in me listening to it, but actually the adult in me. And I know those words are going to resonate so differently. So thank you for sharing that. I thank you for sharing your story. I thank you for spending your time with me, because today you reminded me of Moses. And let me tell you how. Moses' mother, to protect him, she had to put him in a basket and send him down a river. And to protect you from your father, God had to separate you so that you can do what you're doing now. And so to me, when I see your name, I'll always see Moses.
Wow. That is powerful. That is powerful. And I'll always remember that. And I'll always remember your description, your analogy.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the Redefining Grief podcast with Herdyne Mercier.
Thank you very much.